Good morning and welcome to this edition of the DEFCON Warning System Digest. Today we're going to be doing an Ask Me Anything. The last couple of weeks we've sent out inquiries so you can ask us whatever you've wanted to ask. We do this every once in a while, especially during crisis, and mostly the questions are focused on what we think about certain crises going on, like North Korea or Iran or stuff like that, or especially when we start getting into DEFCON 3. We did that a couple of times. People start getting a little nervous, so we wanted to get out there and actually answer direct questions as opposed to just tweeting out things. But this one is more general. We wanted to give you the chance to ask me, Thomas Lonely Wolf, the director of the DEFCON Warning System. You can ask me anything about the system or anything about me, and basically get behind the scenes of what we do with the DEFCON Warning System, what we're like, what influences our thinking, and stuff like that. Basically stuff you've always wanted to ask. That's why there's an Ask Me Anything. At the end of this broadcast, if you have questions that you wanted to ask, feel free to go on our community forum. We're always there. That is the best place to get in contact with us. Don't tweet stuff out at us. We do try and read them, but we're not always able to answer them. In fact, we rarely answer them because we really would prefer you on the community board because there's much more interaction. You really can't get a good answer on Twitter. So we kind of don't like Twitter for back and forth conversations like that. So ask me anything. I'll try and not talk as fast as I usually do, and keep the and uhs as little as infrequent as I can. The first question we got is, tell us 3 things that you do every day to keep yourself up to date on the news. So my morning routine is that I come down to work, and I have a list of news resources that I read. Actually, the first thing I do is run my email and read the comics. There's actually a study out that says people who read the comics as the first part of the newspaper each day, what's a newspaper, live longer. They have more healthy lives than somebody who goes straight to the doom and gloom section of the newspaper. So I've made it my habit to always read the comics the first thing. I read Dilbert and Luann, and there's a couple others in there, but those are the 2 ones that I remember off the top of my head. But so after I read the comics, I go through my news sources, and some of them are direct news sources. A lot of them are aggregates where they get news from other places, and they just list headlines and things like that. So I'm able to just get a wide range of sources. So I've got about like 5 tabs of that, and then I click on articles and read the ones that I think are important to read. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of stuff that really isn't important. We had this one guy on staff several years ago, and he did a news aggregate for us. Not a news aggregate, but events. He listed a bunch of events that were happening in the world, and a lot of it was just not important. So I'd get this big long report that my assistant kind of expected me to memorize, and I went through the report, and this isn't important, I don't need to know this. Who cares that this ship has crossed the lateral boundary of this happens all the time, no one cares. And so when I'm going through the news, I'm trying to figure out what's actually relevant, what's just propaganda, and what's just clickbait. So that comprises a lot of my morning. What else I do is I also get a briefing from the night crew. We do have somebody who listens to the news on the graveyard shift, and what she does is she's working at her computer, and she's got the news in the background, and when something is important, she'll make a note of it, or if it's especially important, she'll call me up and wake me up and say, this is happening, and then I'll come running down to my office and do what I need to do to follow up on that. But mostly I get a briefing in the morning. And then the third thing that I do really is I just listen to the news as it comes in, as I'm doing my other stuff, my other work. I'll check news sites constantly, check Twitter, and for certain keywords and things like that, and plus my own Twitter feed are the ones that I'm following, just to keep up on that. So the news is constantly coming into me. I don't sit at a screen 24 hours a day, or even 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day during my workday and just watch news scrolling by. That would drive me insane. There's a question that we'll get into later on the AMA that that will tell you how I get away from doom and gloom all the time to keep from getting depressed. But so that's what I do each day. It's just I do an info dump in the morning, and then I keep up on it during the day. The next question we got is how can you explain how you vet your sources and verify your information? That's actually a very interesting question. A lot of the sources that we use are, by general standards, they're recognized as legitimate sources. Now, there's a lot of controversy around CNN, or some of the other fringe groups, or other. I don't want to call CNN fringe groups. Propaganda groups like CNN or ABC or MSNBC or places like that. Do they provide legitimate news? Well, no and yes. Even propaganda sites like CNN can give real information out there. So, sorry, something blipped on my computer. I had to check it really fast. No, it wasn't important. Well, it wasn't important to you. It's just file corruption. So even though there's news organizations that are really heavy in their propaganda because they don't like a certain politician or they're trying to push an agenda, they still give real news as well. They got to put the real news in there in order to get you to listen to the propaganda. I'm bleeding. See, I guess in an AMA, anything can happen as well. So, so these news sources we accept them when they report on things that don't affect their agenda. So, if they say, the missiles are launching, well, you don't really need to worry that they're just saying this in order to, push an agenda. So, we can trust places for, certain types of news, like, the major U.S. media outlets, BBC News. They're even though they admit their bias, they're pretty good at getting information out. We even take information from unusual places, non-traditional places, sometimes fringe places. The paranoids. Being paranoid, they've got their feelers out all over the place. And while a lot of the stuff they come up with is pure feldercarb, Battlestar Galactica word, they are also pretty quick at finding out legitimate information. The problem with those sources is that you really, really got to vet them really carefully to make sure that this is real and not just their paranoid fantasy. But they do actually come up with some really good information on the quick because their paranoia drives them to do that. So they can be legitimate sources of information if you're very, very, very careful. We also often take reports from just citizens out in the field. The Fukushima incident is perfect for that. We were taking radiation reports from government agencies, news agencies, nuclear agencies, and we were also taking radiation reports from people who are just out there with their own Geiger counters. Now, we had to couch that with, were they holding it correctly? Were they operating it correctly? So we have to, kind of say, okay, are these readings truly accurate? While this reading is up here, maybe it's not up there, maybe it's just down a little because of the way that they're operating it. They're operating it correctly. They don't know how, but just YouTube itself can be a very, very good source of information, again, if you know how to dig through it. And so we have experts who know how to read these things, how to correct for user error and things like that. So that's how we verify our information. And we're also looking at multiple sources. If this person says this is happening and they're really kind of just Joe Blow on the street, well, maybe we'll look at somebody else, and are they coming with the same information, or does this kind of correlate with information we're getting elsewhere? Okay, maybe all this together is kind of painting us a bigger picture. It's contrary to what Dan Rather, and I'm just pulling that name out of the air because I remember the name, but would have you, or the talking heads would have you believe your traditional news sources are not really good news sources. They're not your sole news sources anymore. Not in 2019, and certainly not in the future. You're not limited to the 3 or 4 major news outlets anymore. Not with Twitter, not with YouTube, not with the internet, not with all these other sources of information available. So that's how we get our information. We vet our sources and verify that the information is coming through. Another question is, where do you see the DEFCON warning system in 10, 20 years from now? Well, when I first started DEFCON warning system way back in the 80s, I certainly didn't see it going into 2019, certainly not as big as it is. It's kind of an ego thing to say, but it's also kind of true. We do have some global influence. We do have governments who watch us. Certainly we have a lot of media organizations watch us, and an awful lot of citizens watch us. Donald Trump was once famous for saying, I could murder someone in the street and still get elected. That was kind of a stupid thing to say, but there was some truth to that. In truth, we could tweet out DEFCON 1 and we'd create a small panic across the world because that many people watch us. So we're very mindful of that when we upgrade our alert. I'm kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but as long as I'm here, let me go down this road. So we're always thinking about, when we change the alert status, is this, what kind of effect is it going to have? We certainly don't hold back just because we think, it might cause a panic, but we are mindful of the kind of influence that we have. So, DEFCON 4, we're not really that concerned about. That's really just, a minor upgrade. It just means we're watching something a little more closely. Maybe you should too, but don't really worry about it. When we start getting to 3, that's when we really start questioning ourselves. 2, which we've never done. 1, which clearly we've never done. We're really going to, make sure we know what we're talking about. But 10, 20 years from now, we're still gonna keep going. I'll put it out there. I'm 52 years old. I've still got a lot of time left, but in 20 years, I'm gonna have to start. 15 years, I'm gonna have to start thinking about moving DEFCON over to another generation, because I'm not going to be able to do this forever. I'll do it as long as God lets me do it. But like Willy Wonka said, no one lives forever. I certainly don't want to try. So hopefully DEFCON's going to keep going, but eventually another generation is going to have to take over. So we're always kind of grooming crew to do that. Question is, since the United States and Russia opt out of the INF treaty, do you think it would lead to another arms race? So I answered a bunch of generalized questions at the beginning. We're going to start getting to some more specific ones, but I made sure not to get so specific that it'll make this AMA irrelevant in the next 5 minutes. So since the United States and Russia opt out of the INF treaty, do you think it would lead to another arms race? No. Why do I think that? Because we're already in another arms race. This INF treaty has absolutely nothing to do with what's going to happen. Russia was ignoring the INF treaty. They were developing a new weapon system. The United States, they're developing these new launchers, which Russia says is outside the INF treaty. So they're just kind of, an arms race is already going on. We have hypersonic missiles, lasers, drones. The INF treaty was very, very narrow in scope. Outside of that, both sides are continuing research and development. They'd be fools not to. Basically, nothing has changed, despite what the doomsayers tell you. Oh, the INF treaty is over. The United States pulled out of it. Boo, U.S. president. Now we're in a new arms race, and the world's going to end in 5 minutes. No, in all honesty, nothing has changed. The day before the INF treaty was withdrawn from, the day after the iron tree was drawn from, nothing has changed. So there you are. Interesting question. What's the closest it's gotten to 1 or 2 in the past years? It's never gotten close to 1. We got kind of close to 2 during the Korean crisis a few years ago when Barack Obama was sending over bombers. I got to admit, that was my heart was beating a little fast there. And I'm not saying that as an exaggeration. I actually was paying very close attention to the news. That was the point where I actually was having the news scroll by me at all times. I was always listening to what was going on, always running around, checking sources, trying to get new information. We were very, very busy. It wasn't close to getting to 2. We were firmly at 3, but we were earnestly talking about what parameters would we need to have in order to go to 2. And that's a conversation we very rarely have. We've only done that twice, so in our entire history. So that was a pretty scary moment. Fortunately, the news media really didn't kind of key into it as much. So the public really wasn't aware of how close we got to nuclear war during the Korean crisis. But it was a lot closer than the news media made it out to be. And maybe that's kind of a good thing because it passed and nobody really had a panic attack. So that's good. But it's bad in that I think the public does need to be aware of these things. So, I think maybe the news media in the end kind of dropped the ball a little bit. So, there you are. Will the third technological revolution lead to global recession and a new world war? No. I guess that kind of goes in with arms race. I couldn't tell you about global recession. I don't know. I'm not an economics expert. Ask your economic experts about that. They'll probably. I think the current thinking is we're kind of heading into another global recession. I don't know. It's not. Excuse me. It's not because of what the United States is doing. It's not because of who the president is. It just happens to go in cycles. You can have a bull market. You can have a bear market. You can have a bull market. You can have a bear. That's just the economic cycles. No matter who's the president, you're probably going to get into a recession, despite what the politicians tell you. Elect us and we'll avoid a recession. No, you won't. It's going to happen. And New World War, I believe there is going to be a world war. If you read the Bible, Revelation, certainly the trumpets and the vials certainly do look like a world nuclear war and the aftermath of a nuclear war. So there you are for that. If you don't believe in the Bible, I don't know why you don't, but let's for the sake of argument, let's say let's dismiss the Bible and just go on human nature. Human nature is warlike, and we're not going to get to a better world. We're getting to a worse world. Even the people who like to think that they're the more mature, always talking about peace and harmony and a global community, they're as violent as the people they criticize. You look at the protests in the United States. The very people who are trying to say, we're the enlightened ones. Well, they go out and they protest, and they're the extremely violent ones. So, it's just human nature. There's going to be a war. So you'd better prepare for it. And if you prepare for it, nothing happens, wonderful. If you don't prepare for it and something happens, you are screwed. It's the same thing with insurance. You have car insurance. You have health insurance. If you don't use it, fine. But it's there when you need it. So prepare for war. If it doesn't happen, great. But if you do prepare for it and it does happen, you're great. Here's kind of a longer question. What can the average American citizen do to help in the prevention of national threats? Is there anything to be done at a local level, or is it mostly going to come from the decisions of House majorities, Senate decisions? So let me expand this question and go outside just the average American citizen. Let's talk about the global citizen. What can the British do? What can the Russian citizen do? What can the Canadian citizen do? You know what? That's a more difficult question to answer than it would seem on the surface, because you can do a lot of things in your own country depending on your country's freedom level. but there's not a lot you can do with the other guy. Iran, what can the average American citizen do to stop Iran from developing the bomb? What can the average Russian citizen do to stop North Korea from developing the bomb? What can the average British citizen do to stop Nigeria from why not developing their own nuclear bomb? You can influence your own politicians. You can't influence the other guy's politicians. So, as far as your own country, you can, argue for, we need stronger deterrent, which will deter the enemy, or we need stronger defense, which will stop an enemy's missiles from coming at you, or we need to just lay down our arms and maybe the other guy will do the same. That was actually okay, I'm going to go on my Battlestar Galactica rant again. That was actually the theme of the very first episode of Battlestar Galactica Saga of a Star World. The Cylons attacked. Sarah Yuri got out there and said, well, they attacked because we have our arms. If we lay down our arms, the Cylons won't see us as a threat and they'll leave us alone. Do you really think if the United States laid down its arms, the other countries would just lay down their arms and go kumbaya? In my personal opinion, because DEFCON Warning System does not promote policy, I'm going to express my own personal opinion here. My own personal private opinion is that's a foolish way to think. You lay down your arms, that just means the other guy is not going to get hurt when he comes to hurt you. So I personally believe in a strong defense and deterrent. So anyway, going back to the question, there's only so much you can do, and there's nothing you can do about the other guy. Next question, is China or Russia deploying troops along the southern border, or any South American countries conspiring to invade our southern border? Okay, that's kind of a paranoid question. I don't know how serious this question was, but I'm answering it because enemy states are using the porous U.S. border to bring in agents. We know this is happening. There are no troops along the southern border. Don't be ridiculous. But there are agents that slip through. So whatever side you come on for strong borders, a weak border, that is what's happening. So I'm not saying that you should develop a stronger border to stop them. I'm not saying that you should have an open border because we all want to do kumbaya with our neighbors and our fellow global citizens, quote unquote. You didn't see me do the finger quotes in the air that I just did, but all I'm saying is if you have an open border, this is what's going to happen. That's what we do. We analyze policy and events. We don't recommend policy, but we analyze the results of policy. And if you have a policy of an open border, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have enemy agents come through. Do you believe our sites, our DEFCON sites on Twitter and YouTube and other sites will still be active long enough to alert the public of confirmation of launch from any country, including the United States? And or do you think these sites or internet in general would or could be shut down in order to stop public awareness? Okay, so two questions. We'll deal with the first one first. Will Twitter still be active long enough in order to get an alert out? Yes. So I guess that does kind of go hand in hand with the second part of the question. Will the government censor these sites? No, the United States is not going to censor or shut down Twitter hours before a nuclear war in order to stop people from alerting. Even if they shut it down, there's other countries who can get the information out. They'll still have Twitter available. Although the United States does kind of control internet addressing. Despite internet being, it's supposed to be non-connected. So if one site goes down, other sites can route around it. Internet addressing, the way I understand it, is there's only 2 locations in the United States that translate where internet addresses are. So like if you say, www.defconwarningsystem.com, it goes to this site where it figures out where DEFCON Warning System is on the internet and then and then goes get the information. Well, since there's only 2 sites, you knock out those sites, you kind of knock out the internet. So that's my understanding of how it works. I'm sure there's people out there who will correct me when I'm wrong and give the correct information. But no, the United States is not going to shut down the internet. And the DEFCON warning system is designed to go to DEFCON 1 about 24 hours before nuclear war happens. That's the theory. That's how we're kind of hoping this is all going to work. It's possible that it could catch us off guard. It's possible that some nut job could just do an out of the blue strike. There's a whole host of things that could limit our response. We could also misinterpret events and say DEFCON 1 and just be wrong and nothing happens. Well, that great if nothing happens, but it's unless you're in the enemy's war room, you have to make a guess. So and that's not just us. The United States military does this all the time. They guess what the enemy is going to do. We guess based on our experience, based on history, based on a whole lot of things, but ultimately it comes down to a guess. So, but we will, at least, like I said, in theory, give an alert long before the missiles launch, long before the government would even take down the internet, if they would. And I do not believe that they will. The internet's also useful for the government itself to get information to different agencies. So just that's not going to happen. One of the questions we got was, can Russia's hypersonic nukes beat U.S. defenses? Yes. Right now, U.S. defenses are in their infancy. They require warning. They need time to lock onto the target. They need time to reach a target, and hypersonic missiles are really, really fast. So this is the arms race that I was talking about earlier. Right now, part of the arms race is getting around the other guy's defenses. I think ultimately defense is going to move to lasers, because it's difficult to outrun the speed of light. The problem with lasers right now is they're easily defeatable by a cloud and water, so rain. But as technology increases, we'll move away from like the little lasers we see on The Big Bang Theory, and we'll move to the kind of lasers that we see in Star Trek. So that's what's going to be coming down in the years. Anti-missile missiles are not going to be very effective. They're just not fast enough. Plus, they also rely on a whole host of things that can go wrong. You need satellites for GPS. You need all these other systems in place. And Russia and China are working very hard on destroying or interfering with U.S. defense satellites. I think the United States relies too much on satellite technology, which can be defeated far too easily. So U.S. defenses are not in a good place right now. Nobody's defenses are in a good place right now because Russian defenses rely on the same technology that U.S. defenses rely on, satellites and things that can be easily defeated. So that's where technology is. Defense is always playing catch up to offense, and right now those hypersonic nukes are, pretty hard to stop. That's why I think we're going to be going to lasers, which we should. Will the U.S. be enforcing the Monroe Doctrine in the Americas and the Caribbean? For those who don't know, the Monroe Doctrine, getting tongue-tied, is an American foreign policy opposing interference in the Western Hemisphere from outside powers. This is the same argument that Russia uses with NATO encroachment in their sphere of influence. The United States sees the Western Hemisphere as their sphere of influence. This is why they went such bat crap crazy over missiles in Cuba, and the fact that they don't like Russia being so embedded in Cuba, because this is the United States playground. China does this with South China Sea and that whole area. Everybody thinks that they own, a part of the world that's outside their borders. So This question probably is influenced heavily by what's going on in Venezuela right now. I don't know when you're listening to this podcast, but at this moment, the president of Venezuela is under a lot of pressure to resign because of fraudulent elections, and he's just a dictator. And right now, the world's kind of united against him, except for Russia, China, and Cuba. Those wonderful countries so well known for their democracy and freedom. But so Russia is kind of backing their ally Venezuela, and the United States really doesn't like the idea of the United States being in Venezuela because, Russia can then start having ports and access to the Western Hemisphere. They already landed a couple nuclear bombers over there, which kind of really irritated the United States. So that's what the Monroe Doctrine is about. That's why the United States is kind of, weighing really heavily on Venezuela to get the president out of there so they can get somebody in there who's a bit more Western friendly. And like I said, this is exactly what happens over in what Russia considers its sphere of influence, and NATO kind of encroaching in that area, which really, really irritates Russia. So, plus you also have, on top of the Monroe Doctrine, you have United States Manifest Destiny and their belief that freedom and democracy is for everybody, and rather than having people come over to the United States to enjoy the freedom and democracy must be exported, much like communism. Even though the Soviet Union preached communism, they were really a socialist dictatorship. So they kind of wanted to spread their socialist dictatorship throughout the world. The United States wants to spread their freedom and democracy all over the world, whether you want it or not. So everybody is kind of peddling their own style of government, and that's kind of what's happening in the Western Hemisphere. So why don't U.S. citizens have some kind of shelter in case of enemy strike? Good question. The United States is premised on the idea of individuality. You take care of yourself. That's why, unlike is it Sweden or Switzerland, where they have a law that your house must have a shelter. You can't build a house without building a shelter. That's why the United States doesn't do that. They believe you can have a shelter or don't. It's up to you. That's part of the history of the United States. Politics-wise, the United States is kind of drifting away from individualism and is now moving toward government control of individual freedoms. But right now, it's still pretty much you do you take care of yourself. So that's why. Should you have a shelter in case of enemy strike? Yes. Why don't you? Again, I'm going to recommend Cressida C. Kearney's Nuclear War Survival Skills. It will show you how to build a shelter very cheap in your home. Any home. A standing house. If you have a basement, it's great. I have a daylight basement. I really wish I had a completely underground basement, but at least I've got something. You should have a shelter. And again, if you never use it, great. You can use it for storage. If you need it, it's there. You don't want to be building a shelter at the last minute because you're going to have a very bad shelter, or maybe you're just going to wait too long and not have one at all. And dying of radiation sickness is really not a fun way to go. Your insides literally turned liquid. It's just nasty. So, and I know some of you thinking, well, I'm in a strike zone. I'm going to just die instantly. Well, those instant death zones are not actually that big. More likely, you're going to be in a fire zone and you're going to burn, and it's not going to be comfortable, but maybe you'll be lucky and you'll just burn for a little bit and then you're just going to die. More likely, you're going to burn and not die. And believe me, second-degree burns hurt. Third-degree burns don't hurt because all your nerves are burned away. Second-degree burns, those are the ones that hurt. They hurt a lot. Don't think like that. Your family doesn't want you to think like that. Your family wants you to take care of them. So don't sit there and look at your wife and your children, and when the missiles are on the way, saying, I didn't do anything to protect you. Because they're not going to be looking at you very happy. They're going to be looking at you that you failed them. Okay, did I just get on a little gender gender bias, your wife. Okay, you know what? Screw that. I'm not being politically correct. You know what? Just wives can take care of your family too. Your husband will look at you and that you didn't take care of him. God, this political correctness drives me crazy. So, next question is, how close did the world almost end? Well, we all know about Able Archer. So I guess this question doesn't really have anything to do with those past, Cuban Missile Crisis and things like that. How recently? I guess this is more recent. Not terribly close. Like I said, the North Korea incident, we got kind of close. That would have been a very small nuclear war. But, we haven't had a really, scary, almost world ending, bend over, kiss your tail goodbye moments in a little while. And I'd like to keep it that way for as long as possible. So, do you guys, here's a really good question. Do you guys only look into and report on foreign government threats, or do you include transnational criminal threats too? I had to ask the author what he meant by this question so that I knew exactly what he meant by transnational criminals. What he means is non-state actors like terrorists and things like that. We used to, we still do, but and let me explain what I mean by that. When we first went on the internet, part of our disclaimer, DEFCON Warning System is not a government agency, is a private entity, is not a government agency, blah, blah. That disclaimer we have at the end. And then we used to say, we monitor nuclear threats from government agencies, and we also used to put something in there by terrorist organizations. We don't really monitor that, but we'll pass the news on to if we find out. Basically, terrorism is really hard to monitor because you never really know about it until it happens. So if some kook with a suitcase nuke decides to blow up Times Square, we're not going to know it until it happens. Now, it's possible because of our global influence and reach, some nutcase may Twitter us and say, I've got a suitcase nuke, and on Thursday I'm going to blow up Times Square or Disneyland or something like that. What do we do with that kind of threat, aside from turn it over to the FBI? You know what? I'm not going to say, other than turn it over to the FBI, what we would do with that kind of information. If we're convinced that a terrorist is going to blow up a nuclear bomb, it's our duty to pass that information on. But notice I qualified that by saying, if we're convinced. If Joe Blow Crazy just messages us and say, I've got a suitcase nuke, I'm just going to laugh at that. But if Joe Blow Crazy Guy backs it up and makes me believe that this is actually going to happen, we're going to put that information out there because we are a warning system. It's our job to warn people that this is going to happen. So, and the FBI may not be happy about us doing that. Well, too bad for FBI. We're going to do this because this is our job. But that's kind of our position on terrorism. It's impossible for us to actively look for it because that's just way out of our scope. We could go on the dark net and just, watch all these guys just making these various threats. And there's just no possible way for us to be able to determine which is a legitimate threat and which is just some guy making, a sick joke. We're not experts at that. The government has experts at that. We're going to leave it to them. It's just not possible for us to do that. But if we get a credible threat, our policy is to alert the public. But it has to be a credible threat. And I'm not going to define what a credible threat is. That's our own internal list. So no one can go out there and say, okay, DEFCON has these kind of standards, so I'm going to meet these standards just to and try and scare everybody. More likely than not, they're not going to send this information to us. They're going to contact ABC, who's got a far greater reach than we do. So this is not. So I don't foresee this happening, but I am saying that we do have policies and procedures in place for this. So, but this is not something that's going to happen. Now, some of the more esoteric questions. Some of these are actually some of these are kind of funny. Toward the end, I've got kind of the funny oddball ones. But these questions, and I'm answering them kind of as a challenge. It says, I said ask me anything, so gosh darn it, you asked and I'm going to answer. So, but before I get into those, these are more questions, personal questions, and they're interesting in the fact in that they kind of show what influences me, what gets me thinking, and things like that. So please don't click off. I think these are actually somewhat more important than some of the questions that we just went, because if you understand how I think and who I am, you'll understand why we come to the conclusions that we do and how we might react to certain situations. So the first question is, if you base your life on researching for the potential for annihilation, how do you relax or keep going? Funny thing, I actually had a job interview that asked me kind of this question. It was for a high pressure job. It was for a 911 operator, and they asked me this question. They said, how do you de-stress? And I said, I play video games. You'd be surprised how much stress you can get rid of by blowing up planets. That was my exact answer. I got the job. I don't do that anymore. I actually went over from 911 back to firefighting. I was a firefighter. I went to 911, and I went. Now I'm back to being a firefighter EMT. So that's what I do. My main game is I play World of Warcraft. The funny thing was, during some of the older DEFCON meetings, several years ago, we'd have these meetings on TeamSpeak. This was before Discord came along, and a lot of times these meetings, they started off. They would start off. We talk about what's going on in the world and the world situation, and then it would kind of devolve and based on what was happening in the world, sometimes the meeting would go for an hour or 2 hours before it devolved. And most of the time it devolved in like 5 minutes. And they'd start talking about just completely irrelevant stuff that I was not interested in. It wasn't talking about the world situation. It was talking, I don't remember what it was, but it had nothing to do with DEFCON. And it was more about just, let's be a team and kumbaya, and I really didn't want to do that. And so I'd be playing video games while I'm on Discord or TeamSpeak, and I'd be playing World of Warcraft, just listening to what was going on. And they weren't fun. I know some of my crew kind of got upset at me because they didn't think I was much of a team player back then, because I wasn't really taking part in these team speaks. And the team speaks really were kind of boring and uninteresting and not relevant. So that's kind of why I didn't do it too much. But so I just digressed a little bit. So that's kind of what I do. I'm not going to tell you what character I play or what server I'm on. That's for you to guess. But that's kind of my thing. I tried to get into Final Fantasy. I really like Final Fantasy 14, but there's no world chat, and I really like being able to listen to people talk, and so that's kind of why I didn't really get into it. And the main story quest line is kind of boring, but it was the lack of world chat that kind of drove me away, and that's kind of why I like World of Warcraft, because I can see people talk about different things, and it's kind of wild sometimes, and I don't really take part in it, but I like reading it, listening to it, or watching it, and it's kind of fun. So that's what drew me to World of Warcraft. So that's what I do. That's how I relax, keep going. Plus, I also I do writing. I've written a couple of books. I've gotten some audio dramas professionally published. They're called Tiger's Quest. They're not the Tiger's Curse series. That's by calling somebody or other. They're the Tiger's Quest series. Tiger's Quest, Tiger's Second Quest, After the Quest, Final Quest. I use a pen name for that, but just look up those titles if you're interested. They're the story about two Bengal tigers and how they cope with the arrival of man into their jungle domain. It's kind of done in a Bambi-esque style. So the audio dramas, they're professionally done. So if you're interested, just look those up. You can get them on Amazon. You can actually go to the website tigersquest.com, find them. The books, you can read them. They're not very long books. So anyway, that's what I do to keep myself going and to relax. I don't watch a lot of TV. I do audio dramas. I do Doctor Who audio dramas. DWAD.net. If you're interested in Doctor Who, I've been doing those for 30 years. I'm watching Soap, that old TV show Soap. I got those on DVD. So that's what I do. But I don't watch a lot of TV. Here's an important question. What are your personal politics? My personal politics. A lot of people think I'm a Republican. I'm not. I'm actually a secessionist. I believe that the United States is so far lost, there's no going back. I believe that the only way to get back to the Constitution is to just break off. How we would do that, I don't know. But, I'm not advocating for civil war or anything like that. But I do believe we need to just break it off. California and New York, they can go their own separate way. They could be their own socialist country if they want to. And we'll go back to living the Constitution. It's clear that now remember, I'm speaking personally, so don't take this as DEFCON. This is just me. I was asked a personal question. I'm giving a personal answer. California hates the Constitution. New York and them, they hate the Constitution, so they can go on and they can hate the Constitution as much as they want. People who love the Constitution, we can form our own country. We'll call it the United Republics of America, and we'll go back to how the Constitution was supposed to be, and those left coast and east coast can just be socialist and government controlled, and they can hate freedom and they can hate their citizens and just rule over them like the dictators they are. But that's me. So I don't vote Republican. Washington State, where I live, we have open primaries, so we don't register Republican or Democrat or Independent when we register to vote. We just have open ballots. So those are my politics. I am an avowed secessionist. That's different from anarchist. That's different from voluntarism. I mentioned I'd never even heard that. A friend of mine kind of sent me a link to that on Facebook. I joined the group just to see what they were talking about. I think I'm on there. Every once in a while I read it, but I don't join in conversation. I think I joined it once or twice, but I don't. I think volunteerism are kind of like neo-anarchists or something like that. They're kind of rebels without a cause. If you're one of those people, I'm not saying that to bash you. I'm just that's kind of my personal opinion. It's just not me. I do believe there do need to be some sort of rules for society. Even God, gave us rules. So I don't believe in absolute, anarchy. I don't think society will work that way. So okay, those are my personal politics. Can you tell us a unique hobby that you enjoy? Like I said, I do writing. I play video games. That's kind of what I do. So, do you believe Jesus is the only begotten Son of God? Yes, I do. Here's another important question. It influences me very much. I believe that Jesus came in the flesh, died, rose again on the third day, and sits at the right hand of God, and that he will come again. Many people reject the idea of God today. Barack Obama was actually right when he said the United States is not a Christian country. Certainly Europe is not a Christian area. We've gotten so far away from God. A lot of people just now question the existence of God. Preachers and them will get into in your heart, or in your soul. The Bible says the heart is a deceitful thing. So, I wouldn't rely on my heart. We do know it's a historical fact that Jesus existed. No historian claims that Jesus does not exist. So it's not a question of did Jesus exist? It's a question of what are you going to do about its existence? Jesus claimed that he came from the Father, that no one comes to the Father but through him. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through him. So either Jesus was a liar, insane, or he was telling the truth. Those are the only three choices. If he was a liar, he went to the cross as a liar. Peter the Apostle, he was crucified upside down. If he knew Jesus was a liar, that's kind of far to take it. A lot of people today, they follow their faith to the death. There are people in the Philippines who every Good Friday they crucify themselves to show the suffering of Jesus. I'm not exactly sure why they do it. I know there's a reason to do it, and I just can't. It's not on the top of my head. Like I said, I do these podcasts from the hip. I don't have notes in front of me, so I'm trying to. So if I sound unprepared, it's because I didn't prepare for this. I'm trying to give you real thoughts from the heart, from the soul, rather than something that I scripted and researched to try and get you to, the way that they do in news media and things like that. I'm trying to give you real answers instead of fake answers. So a lot of people follow their faith to the death, but you have, Peter, all the apostles except for John, they all were murdered. One of them was sawed in half. I don't know, I think that was one of the prophets. But some of them were crucified, stabbed, stoned. And these are the apostles who followed you, who were there with Jesus, walked with him, talked with him. They were there during his life. They saw everything that Jesus did. Or if Jesus was lying, they saw that he didn't do this stuff. And they still went to their deaths with this. If he was lying, they went to their horrible, horrible deaths with this lie on their lips. If Jesus was lying, why would they do this? Why if they knew this was a lie, why would they go to this kind of length for the lie? They could have easily said, you know what, Jesus was lying. I don't crucify me, don't stab me. I was lying this whole time just to get fame and fortune or women or whatever. But no, I don't want to die for this because it's not true. We look at modern history. Joseph Smith, who founded the Mormon religion. He didn't die. He didn't die for his beliefs. This guy died with a gun in his hand, trying to stay alive because he wasn't willing to die for what he knew was not true. As opposed to these apostles, if Jesus was lying, they went to the carpet up for this lie. They could have saved their lives. They had nothing to lose by saying it was a lie if it was a lie. The next question is, was Jesus insane? Well, again, we go back to, if Jesus was insane, then nothing he said was true, nothing he did was true. Now, the apostles could have believed his insanity in that he was, okay, Jesus is claiming he's the Son of God, he's the only way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but through him. Okay, fine, we're going to buy this insanity, and they'll go to the death for it. But remember that these same apostles also said Jesus healed the sick, raised the dead, prophesied. Insane people don't heal the sick. Insane people don't raise the dead. Insane people don't make prophecies that come true. Remember the woman at the well? Jesus came up to her and said, "Where's your husband?" And the woman said, "I don't have a husband." And Jesus said, "You're right. You have had 4 husbands, and the one you're with now isn't your husband." And she goes, "I perceive from this you are a prophet." Insane people don't do that. Not accurately. Insane people may make a prophecy every once in a while and get it accurate, like these television psychics who make such vague predictions that of course they'll come true. There's this great Weird Al Yankovic song called "Your Horoscope for Today." YouTube it. One of the lines is, "The stars predict that you'll wake up, do some stuff, and then go back to sleep." I love that song. But that's how a lot of the psychics today work. But Jesus is making specific prophecies that come true. And these apostles who walked with him, talked with him, lived with him, saw all this. And again, they went to their deaths. And if Jesus didn't make these prophecies, why go to the death for something that didn't happen when they could have easily walked away and saying, I'm not giving my life for this liar, this insane freak, because I'm not going to get anywhere. These apostles, these people, and I'm not talking about those who fall later on and have to go on faith, who seeing yet believe. Blessed is, you have seen, Jesus said to Thomas, you have seen, you have believed. Blessed is he who has not seen and yet believed. These apostles saw, and they could have walked away, but they didn't. So if Jesus is not lying and Jesus is not insane, he must be telling the truth. There's a lot about God that we don't know. And any scientist worth his salt will say, just because we don't know or understand doesn't mean it's not there. That doesn't mean it is there. That doesn't mean it's not there. Jesus said God is real. Jesus said he is the way. He said that a man must be born again or he cannot see the kingdom of God. Some of you hearing this, probably a lot of you hearing this, don't believe in God. And so I thank you for listening this long, because there are other questions I'll get to. So I'm not going to hold you up much longer. Give me like 30 more seconds, and then I'll move on to the next question. But for those of you who believe in God, remember, even the demons believe and tremble. It's not enough to believe. You must live for Christ. He gave his life for you. You give his life for him. You must be born again, or you cannot see the kingdom of God. By faith you are saved through grace, not of works, lest any man should boast. You cannot work your way to salvation. You just have to accept it. Say that Jesus is your Lord. You will live for him for this moment forever. Ask him to make you born again. Ask him to forgive your sins, and that he will be your Lord from now and forever, and you will be saved. That is the promise he made to you. If you have done this, then you are saved. If you've not done this, Jesus is still waiting for you. Don't wait until it's too late, because it is appointed unto every man to die once, after this, the judgment. We are hybrid creatures. We are both body and spirit. And one day we will stand before God, and we will be judged. And if our sins are not covered by Christ, we will pay for our sins. But Jesus Christ paid for our sins, but it's a gift. It requires a giver and a receiver. Jesus can give the gift, but you have to receive it. If you don't want to receive it, you don't have to. But for those who will receive it and make Jesus their Lord, you are saved. So I want to move on to the next question. Thank you for listening to me. Now we're on to the really weird questions, the ones that I'm answering just as a challenge. If you were a furry, what animal would you be? Tiger. Remember, I wrote some books about tigers. They're awesome. I love cats, and tigers are the best cats. There's only like 5,000 of them left in the world. They are starting to repopulate a little bit, but there's still so much poaching, and there's still so much encroachment into their habitat, so much habitat loss. It's just, for those of you in areas who do get tiger products, don't. I'm not saying donate to World Wildlife Fund. I don't like World Wildlife Fund. They promote a lot of bad government policy. Plus, any money you give them, it doesn't go specifically to the tigers. It goes to some generic fund. The same reason I don't like Consumer Reports. They do some good work, but they do an awful lot of bad work too. They promote an awful lot of bad government policy, so I don't support them anyway either. But if I was a furry, that's who I would be. And the last one, are aliens real? Of course aliens are real. They're crossing the borders all the time. Some of them are legal, some of them are illegal. And the United States is struggling on what to do with the illegal ones. So of course aliens are real. You see them all the time. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending this Ask Me Anything. Now I have a question I want to ask you. we do these YouTube podcasts more out of tradition. This is kind of how we started on the internet, along with the website. This is how we started contacting people, how people got interested in DEFCON Warning System, how we started. I think this is even before Twitter. Do you utilize this? Would you like us to move to just a podcast format on like iTunes, where you can just download that? Or do you still want to do YouTube? We have a couple thousand subscribers, but I don't know how many people are interested in the videos. They're kind of a pain in the neck to put together, the videos. The podcasts are easier. But if people are interested in, we'll still keep doing them. If you're not that interested, maybe we'll just move over to podcasts, or maybe just stop these altogether. But I do kind of like getting out there and giving this more personal touch rather than just the robotic, this is the DEFCON warning system. We can go more in depth with these digests, but I kind of want to know what you think, how you'd like us to proceed, what other things we can do differently. So please feel free to come over to the community forum, leave us your comments and suggestions. We do read them, we do act on them, we do talk about them. So again, thank you for joining us for the AMA. Next DEFCON Digest, we'll go back to the update we had this month. We'll go more in depth on our thinking and what it means. Thank you again. I am Thomas Lonely Wolf, the DEFCON Warning System Director.